Hello, this is Angela, one of the hosts of Journeys of Hope, and I'm standing here on the grounds of Pilgrim Center of Hope. Guiding people on Journeys of Hope is our passion, and as a nonprofit organization, we couldn't do it without you. Today, I'd like to thank our generous sponsor who made this podcast possible, in honor of Valentin, Nicholas, and Francisco Campos.
Journeys of Hope, an introduction to the Universal Church that promotes an attitude of pilgrimage among the faithful by introducing you to pilgrim destinations around the world. Welcome to Journeys of Hope, your spiritual passport to pilgrim destinations, placing you in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the apostles, and the saints. By placing you at a holy site and exploring the Christian pilgrimage experience, we hope to define what our daily lives as Catholics are called to be. I'm Robert Rodriguez.
I'm Angela Sealana, and Robert and I are the media staff for Pilgrim Center of Hope, a ministry guiding people to Christ in the church. Welcome to our program. Journeys of Hope is a new weekly series produced by Pilgrim Center of Hope. We've just completed our first quarter century of service.
Hear, hear.
We invite you to visit us at our tranquil location in Northwest San Antonio. Our website will give you a good introduction of our ministry, and that is pilgrimcenterofhope.org.
Well, have any of you ever wondered about the terms Basilica and National Shrine and what these designations signify? Or perhaps do you have a devotion to St. Therese of Lisieux or have an interest in Carmelite spirituality?
Well, today on Journeys of Hope, we would like to take you on a mini pilgrimage to what the city of San Antonio has designated as a landmark of exceptional historical significance, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Little Flower. During this hour, we will explore how the popularity of St. Therese led to this impressive structure, how the treasures of this church are found throughout the building, and how the National Shrine evolved into a basilica. We'll also talk about some of the major additions that have taken place within recent years. Again, this is Journeys of Hope, a production of Pilgrim Center of Hope. And this program, along with other episodes of Journeys of Hope, can be found on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org.
So how exactly did San Antonio end up as the home of the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Little Flower? There's a lot of interesting things to mention. We're going to get right into those. First, just to let you know, the Little Flower is another name for St. Therese of Lisieux, a young French nun. In 1925, Pope Pius XI canonized St. Therese, at that time calling her the greatest saint of modern time. The publication then of her autobiography, The Story of a Soul, which was released in 1898, exactly a year after her death, also contributed to her popularity around the world. Her spirituality, now referred to as the Little Way, shed light on the holiness to which we are all called and the suffering that she endured along with her tragic death from tuberculosis at the young age of 24. All of these things deeply touched people and generated a universal appeal. Carmelites compelled to honor St. Therese and spread her message. So the order wanted to honor her, seeing how everybody, she was so beloved throughout the world. Therese's convent belonged to a family of religious orders and other faithful, which still exist today, tracing their devotion back to the monastics on Mount Carmel in the Holy Land. They're commonly all referred to as the Carmelites. Spanish Descalced Carmelite friars first arrived in San Antonio by way of Torreon, Mexico, in 1926, a year after St. Therese was canonized. The friars had fled from Mexico during the Revolution in 1914, first to Oklahoma to minister to the Mexican community there, and they eventually made their way to San Antonio, also focused on wanting to help the Mexican community here. The parish they first established in 1926 was originally known as Our Lady of Mount Carmel and St. Therese Church. And again, they purposely placed it in one of the poorer parts of San Antonio. At that time, in fact, that area, the west side, is where many immigrants from Mexico chose to settle. The first Spanish friars were able to minister to this west side community in their native language and also wanted to give them a beautiful house of worship to come to. These friars envisioned an extraordinary place of worship to honor this newly canonized Carmelite saint. And they also wanted it accessible to people from all walks of life. So they decided to build a national shrine in response to a wave of great devotion to St. Therese from all over the country and the world. They certainly wanted this project to be blessed, so they actually, one of the four original friars, Father Ramon Gomez, traveled to France to the Carmelite community of Lisieux, and there they got the blessing of the nuns of St. Therese's own Carmelite convent, including one of her blood sisters, Pauline, who at the time was the prioress of the convent. And, of course, all the other nuns were delighted, and they all pledged their support. The other big piece, which, of course, would be needed for this project, would be the financial resources. Given the popularity of St. Therese, soon they found a number of donations, resources pouring in from all parts of the world. And what makes this especially unique and special is that this happened all during the time of the Great Depression and the stock market crash, those years from 1929 to 1931. In fact, they were actually able to complete it at the end of that period. The other thing they had in place was a national magazine. The Carmelites had what was called the Little Flower magazine, and at that time had 100,000 subscribers, which is a lot even for today. But through their magazine, they were able to spread the word of the project, and that helped to get it to where the donations were pouring in. And in fact, 6,000 donors responded and were able to contribute over $500,000 back then in the 1920s towards the composition of the construction of the National Shrine.
That is truly extraordinary.
That is. I mean, it just shows how much people loved St. Therese. And, newly canonized, modern-day saint, story of the soul, all these things, I think, excited people. And to be able to have a hand in creating this national shrine, I'm sure, spoke to them. What's unique, and, as we talk about how impressive that is for if anyone goes and visits the National Shrine, which we're inviting everyone to do, they will see names all throughout along the walls, and it is all the names of these donors that have been permanently etched on tiles that cover the interior of the basilica, not only in the nave, but also in other spaces throughout the shrine. So the National Shrine from the very beginning was intended, yes, to be a shrine to Therese and a place that would call people, all the Christian faithful from the diocese and beyond, to come and visit, to make pilgrimage to, and most especially those with devotion to St. Therese, the Little Flower. This is part of what explains the notable size and beauty of the church. Everything is done on a grand architectural scale, and it certainly dominates the neighborhood where it's at, there on Zarzamora near Culebra Road here in San Antonio. It occupies half a city block, and the entire complex sits on a 2.4-acre site. When it was built, it was the first national shrine in the United States dedicated to St. Therese.
So, yes, and it was dedicated in 1931, and the cornerstone was laid October 15th, 1929. Architecturally speaking, let's get into some of these details, which are very interesting. The Basilica of the Little Flower is truly magnificent. The 12,000 square foot church was designed by architect Charles L. Minot Jr. and was built by the Deneby Construction Company. The church and the adjacent monastery is in the Beaux Arts style, combining Mediterranean as well as Spanish motifs, and that is very appropriate given the origin of the Carmelite spirituality in the Mediterranean Sea. Along with St. Therese and St. Theresa of Avila, but we'll talk more about that later. The steel beam framework was erected to form the church's nave and dome, and masonry walls made of gray Bedford, Indiana limestone were then built around the metal framework. This type of limestone was also used in the facade of the old municipal auditorium, which was preserved and now serves as the entrance and lobby to the Tobin Center for the Arts. So how about that connection?
Yeah, when you look at the two, you can see the similarity in even just the color of that material.
So let's go ahead and start our pilgrimage journey then by looking at the facade of the shrine. So we're going to walk you through an actual pilgrimage of this beautiful church. So it faces east, and it's flanked by two bell towers. Both are 16 feet square at their base, and they're capped with these beautiful yellow glazed tile shingles. It really stands out amongst the landscape. The south tower is the tallest. It rises 118 feet, and that is the bell tower. So with that, we have 3 open tiers, and each one of those is progressively smaller. The lower tier holds 2 bronze bells. The middle stage or tier contains 4 bells, and all of those bells were cast in Germany. And Robert, you were telling me that the various bells also have names for the different Carmelite saints.
Exactly. Of course, there's got to be one named for St. Therese, and then there are also bells named for St. Therese of Avila and St. John of the Cross, and then other Carmelite saints as well.
Beautiful. So the North Tower then is 72 feet tall, and it's actually capped by this beautiful 7-foot-tall statue of St. Therese, which was cast in Italy, and it weighs 1,000 pounds. So she's not a not so little flower, that one.
No, that statue's not going anywhere. Yeah.
The statue faces downtown San Antonio, and in one arm, she is holding a bouquet of roses, and the other arm is outstretched with a crucifix in her hand as if she's blessing the city of San Antonio. So there's really so much symbolism that we'll get into regarding St. Therese and roses, but the most famous is her quote, "I will spend my heaven doing good on earth. I will let fall a shower of roses." So between those towers, we see the central portion, which rises to a peak of 64 feet and is dominated by a large 3-part stained glass window composition dedicated to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Above the stained glass windows, there's 3 empty niches that we see which would typically have statuary there. And then just beyond the facade is a high gabled roof that covers the central portion of the nave, and this roof is covered with red Spanish S glazed clay tiles.
It's another thing that from a distance draws your attention, for sure.
Absolutely. So let's walk to the entrance now. We see 3 arched openings, each with massive pairs of copper-clad wood-paneled doors with leaded glass. And the entrance arcade is flanked by tall decorative torches of bronze and glass, which over the years have taken on a beautiful patina. The doors are 6 feet above ground, and you have to go up these a large set of stairs.
Yes.
Pink granite stairs to get to those. The steps and the landing stretch the full width of the building between the towers, about 50 feet. So before we get inside, we'll give you a bird's eye view of the layout. So there is a central octagonal dome rising 75 feet, and it's topped by a lantern cap. And this is 40 feet above the ridge of the main roof. So the dome is actually also topped with that same yellow glazed tile shingle used on the towers. Then there's the tomb chapel, and that tomb chapel, very familiar for those of you who have visited. That's the south transept, which the transept is almost like the arm if you looked at the church footprint as if it were a cross. So the south arm is the tomb chapel, and that would be on your left-hand side if you stood right in front of the altar for communion. So this is the tomb chapel of St. Therese, and we'll talk more about why it's called the tomb chapel.
By the way, it's also capped with that same type of S-tile that's on the roof, but it's in the shape of a cone, as opposed to being rounded like a lot of side chapels might have.
Right. So then what would be on your right-hand side is the side entrance to the church, and that is the north transept or arm. And on the exterior, there's that same copper-clad doors, a landing, and some granite steps. So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the monastery, and that is right there on the southwest corner of the church. And it's a 2-story L-shaped building with an arcaded main facade, and that is the home to a community of Discalced Carmelite friars. And the monastery is connected to the church on the second level, and that actually leads directly into the sacristy. In front of the monastery, just Beyond a semicircular driveway, there is a grotto made of honeycomb limestone with figures of Our Lady of Lourdes and St. Bernadette. And then also we have Little Flowers School right across Kentucky Street north of the church. And the school serves K through 8th grade. And we have also there the Convent of the Holy Ghost Sisters. Both of those were constructed in 1947, replacing the original school, which was established in 1926. So now that we've got our layout, let's venture inside what started as a national shrine and later was given the honor of being a basilica. So we'll explain those terms a little later on, but let's look in the inside.
Okay, well, if you've ever been in that area, we talked earlier about what a beautiful structure this is. There are particular views, for instance, from nearby Woodlawn Lake looking towards downtown. You can't help but notice this amazing structure just towering over the area. Same with if you're a nearby Interstate 10 and you look to your west. That's the one thing that stands out in that whole neighborhood. So it really is there drawing you in, calling you to come inside. And so, yes, for those who have visited and for those who are perhaps now, as they hear about it, thinking about visiting, I will tell you that once you step into the church building, you immediately get a sense of what a special place this is. It's very traditional, it's very classic, and if there's something in the air, you feel the spiritual aspect of this wonderful house of worship. It's usually dimly lit, except of course during Mass when all the lights are turned on. But with all the arches and this big space, it calls you inside. So when you first step into those doors that Angela described, you then come into the narthex of the church or the lobby area. And this, of course, is traditionally a transitional space from the outside world into the house of God. This is also where processions will gather, and even to this day, the priest and altar boys, acolytes gather back here and then process up the main altar. In this space, as you walk in, to the right-hand side, originally was where the baptistry was, and it originally had a large octagonal marble baptismal font, and it was enclosed behind a ornate wrought iron gate. That gate was 10 feet high, 8 feet wide. I actually remember it when it was there prior to 2005 through 2007, when some remodeling took place. They added an elevator that would be able to access the undercroft or basement and also to access the choir loft. And so they ended up moving the font and the gate from that area, and today use a more portable baptistry that is kept up, or font that is kept up in the transept area of the nave. And so from here, you will then enter through 3 additional sets of wooden doors that bring you into the nave. What you will see as soon as you come into that space, into the actual nave, is your eyes are immediately drawn in front of you towards a life-size diorama over the altar. And it truly makes you feel like you're looking directly into heaven. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we walk through the church. But that immediately calls your attention.
It almost makes you just stop in your tracks for a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, because again, it is life-size, and it's just something for most people probably that they've never seen before there over the altar. And the way it's positioned, you almost think it's going to come to life before your very eyes. So we talked a little bit earlier about how so many people donated to helping have this National Shrine constructed. As you're stepping into the nave, there are 2 large holy water fonts or stoops, and made of marble, so they flank that center aisle. And one of them, in fact, in very large letters, is prominently inscribed with the name of an actress that, by way of all these classic TV channels that are out there, you still can see this show. But you will see the name Barbara Stanwyck, and she was famous for being the matriarch of the Barkley clan from the long-running Big Valley TV series in the 60s. So she was a Catholic, and as the story goes, she had a devotion to St. Therese, so she contributed to this cause as well. So now we are getting into the space where all the pews are, and this is the nave, and that word, the Latin navis, means ship. And so this is the Ark of Salvation, and it is as if you're in a ship that carries us to heaven over the stormy seas of life. The Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that the church is that bark or ship which, in the full sail of the Lord's cross, by the breath of the Holy Spirit, navigates safely in this world. So we definitely, as you look around you, we have stepped into a quite large ship. The space measures 72 feet wide. It's almost 100 feet to the outer walls of the transept, and the distance from the narthex into the apse of the sanctuary is 177 feet. The ceiling over the nave rises 64 feet high, and that's to the height of a high gable. Buttresses form a cross-vaulted design, and the flooring beneath is terrazzo tile, and in some areas have some really beautiful patterns in it as well. You immediately also are drawn to two sets of windows flanking either side of the nave. There are four large arched stained glass windows, each approximately 18 feet tall and 6 feet wide. They're done in a modern figural style and use a unique color palette of warm, rich colors made even more vibrant because of tiny bubbles that are actually in the glass. They actually call it bubble glass, and this adds more illumination by the way it refracts the light. The set on the south wall depict moments in the life of St. Therese of Avila, while those on the north side deal with the life of St. John of the Cross.
And those were the two saints that are most well known for having reformed the Carmelite order. So that's why they're so important in this church.
Exactly, reforming the order in the late 1500s. And so those particular sets were actually installed later, well after when the church in 1931 was dedicated and opened. So yes, these came over 20 years later and were actually designed by a different company than those that are in the tomb chapel. The company that designed these is called the Emil-Frey Stained Glass Company, and they're from St. Louis. And it actually took 3 years to complete the process from design to installation. And they're, as I mentioned earlier, made of a German design called bubble glass. And that is, I think, what makes them stand out and look more unique because of the way the colors appear. It's also worth noting that where these larger windows are located by the side of the aisles or ambulatories, there you'll notice that when you're in there that the roof is lower in these stretches, so it's only 30 feet high here, and from the outside you see these like shed roofs over the aisles, and whereas above the pews you have a much taller space rising, as we mentioned earlier, to 60 plus feet, and up above the nave there's a second rank of smaller arched windows. They're in sets of 2s, 10 on either side, so we have a clear story here. And in those windows, we'll see various crests related to the Carmelites in this province, first coming from Spain, of course, but then there are crests related to the various states that are included in this province, Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. As we continue looking around, we're going to see up in that clear story, just above the arches, we see large lanterns, brass lanterns hanging above the arches, 5 on either side of the nave. And if you look really closely, you see the silhouette of St. Therese holding the roses and crucifix across her chest. And, everything again, you're seeing that the roses, more roses here, and we'll talk more about the rose motif throughout, but just again, part of the devotion and honoring St. Therese in various ways throughout this beautiful shrine. Between the large windows we just described and the transept along both sides of in the aisles above the confessionals are additional windows, but I will also mention that there are 2 paneled wood confessionals on either side of the nave. And then as we get back to talking about those windows, they're the last moments in both St. Therese of Avila and St. John of the Cross's life. So you basically have their life stories, St. John of the Cross on the right and St. Therese of Avila on the left. Mm-hmm. As we talked earlier about references to the little flower and what I just mentioned about the silhouettes, the rose motif is not only in those places, but we really see it. We're going to see it in marble carvings. We're going to see it in mosaics that are on the altar rail, on the woodwork, and as well as in the statuary and the furnishings. The best materials were used throughout the space. The one that I think gets your attention and makes it feel really special would be the carved Carrara marble that is throughout. It was actually all designed by a local master craftsman named Luis Rodriguez, and for years his family had a monument company there in the area near San Fernando Cemetery that would actually create monuments for grave sites. And so that existed for many, many years. What's interesting is he did the design work, and then the marble was carved in Italy, and it was shipped in pieces to San Antonio and then assembled here by a team of workmen. And that process, according to record, it said that it took like 3 or so months to accomplish. Also made of that marble is the ambo, where the gospel is proclaimed, and that is up in the front left part of the nave next to one of the columns where the archways are at. And this rises to about 5 feet. It's hexagonal in shape, and here is where we see a number of mosaics. There's others in other areas, but these refer to the prophet Elijah, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Therese of Avila, St. John of the Cross, and St. Cyril of Alexandria. And all of these, of course, were doctors of the church or inspiration for the order of the prophet Elijah, and they were all known for their eloquence. So appropriate place to have those images.
Beautiful. Well, as we continue walking forwards, we're going to come to the altar rail. So that is the communion rail, separating the nave from the heavenly sanctuary that we see before us. So the marble altar rail is 55 feet wide, very wide, 26 inches tall, and has 36 arches within it. So on that, we are going to see 6 colored tile mosaics depicting moments in the life of Saint Therese. And at the center of that are 2 bronze gates. So before we continue going into this beautiful altar piece that we've talked about as we walk into the church and all of the beautiful symbolism of these many things that we've talked about, the saints and the Carmelites, what are all of these things referring to, and what are they drawing our attention to? Well, let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we will talk about all of these beautiful meanings of the symbolism and the altar piece. So thanks for sticking with us here on Journeys of Hope, and we'll continue our journey in just a moment. Welcome back to Journeys of Hope. Here we are making a mini pilgrimage through the National Shrine of the Little Flower here in San Antonio. And we are talking about finally getting to the altar piece in front of it's almost the main highlight of the whole basilica.
It truly is in every way.
So what is it that we're looking at? Well, here we are at the altarpiece. We look up and we see a Loretto that has a life-size 3D scene of, first of all, it looks like we're in heaven. There are clouds all around. There are angels, cherubs, maybe seraphim. I'm not sure which exactly type of angels those are, but many types of angels we see surrounding, first of all, the cross. So we see the cross of Christ at the very top of the clouds, and over that is a cloth with the holy face of Jesus. Now, why is that? Saint Therese, her religious name that she took was Therese of the Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. So we see the Holy Face there on the cross. Then we see the Child Jesus in the arms of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So she is, Our Lady of Mount Carmel is handing Saint Therese a bouquet of roses. And we see Saint Therese kneeling before her, accepting the roses, and we see a rose falling from her left hand. And again, that is a reference to her desire to spend her heaven doing good upon earth by showering down roses or graces through her prayers from heaven for us. So all of this gives us this depiction of Saint Therese. What her ultimate desire was here in this life was to continue giving glory to God and helping us all to get to know God from heaven. So it's a beautiful symbol, and it teaches us something else too. So we see one of the angels holding an open book, and it's inscribed with Saint Therese's creed: "Love is repaid by love alone. Love is repaid by love alone." So we also see at the very, very top of that diorama 2 angels holding a crest with the coat of arms of the Discalced Carmelite order. And just briefly, the symbolism of the crest. So in that we see almost a triangle, a brown triangle, and that symbolizes Mount Carmel, where the Carmelites were established, where they draw their spirituality from Saint Elijah, the prophet. And then there is a star on that mountain that symbolizes all of the Carmelites who are making their way up the mountain to heaven. So it's the all of those Carmelites who are on their earthly pilgrimage here on earth. And then there are 2 stars above the mountain, and those symbolize the Carmelites that have made their pilgrimage finally to heaven. And then above that, we see a crown, and that crown symbolizes the kingdom of God.
Yes.
So all of that is telling us the story of the Carmelite order and what this church wants to share with us, which is that we are all on a journey. So how appropriate that we're talking about this on Journeys of Hope. So just below the altarpiece, we see some tall Lorettos with a small baldachin over the tabernacle. And we see mosaics of the 4 evangelists, 2 on either side of the tabernacle. Then we see life-size statues of St. Theresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, one on either side of the Lorettos. And again, they are those 2 key saints in the Carmelite spirituality who reforms the Carmelite order. The marble altar is, it also has some symbolism, again, with the prophet Elijah. So on that, we see a mosaic of Elijah, and he's receiving food and water in the desert. So that indicates to us the story from the first book of Kings. When Elijah is in the desert, he's in the wilderness, he doesn't have provisions, and he asks God, just let me die. And some angels come to him and provide him with a jar of water and baked bread, and that sustains him for 40 days. So again, that reminds us of the Eucharist being our bread of life that sustains us on our journey. The sanctuary itself, so again, that area around the altar is higher up, and again, indicating heaven to us. Then we have an apse. So the apse is under a semi-dome, and the semicircular sanctuary also includes the cathedra, the Pope's chair, and a place for the clergy to sit. So because this is a basilica, it has to have a chair for the Pope whenever he comes to visit.
Exactly, reserved in the instance he comes to town.
Yes. So as we're looking there in the apse, We see some looking rooms. Those are above the altarpiece, and they're looking out onto the sanctuary. And we also have the sacristy space on either side of the sanctuary. So again, real quick, to wrap up the apse area, we have also the Sacred Heart of Jesus altar that has Rorettos with the tabernacle, and we have a St. Joseph altar with Rorettos with the tabernacle. So beautiful iconography and symbolism here.
So for that person that was standing directly in front of the altar looking up at that altarpiece, if they're in the middle of the transept right under the dome, if they look to their left, then they're going to see the tomb chapel of St. Therese, which is a replica of the tomb chapel in Lisieux, France. And this is also in an apse, and it's separated from the transept by a very ornate gate made of turned wrought iron, and it is ornamented with more roses, referring back to the little flower. This gate is 24 feet wide and 20 feet tall. It's actually a little taller in the middle, as there is a cross in the middle portion of the gate. If you would go there, there are kneelers and candle stands along the gate, and those gates are closed, and it allows people to come and pray there in front of the tomb chapel of St. Therese. These wrought iron gates and grills were actually created by a gentleman by the name of Theo Voss, who, when he was alive, was known as San Antonio's master metalsmith. And he's also known for creating the chandeliers in our famous historic Majestic Theater, which is in downtown San Antonio. And so, yes, between that altarpiece and the tomb chapel, these are things you would not see in any other church. And again, given that this is a national shrine, of course, the reasons why you're going to find them here at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Little Flower. Now, within the tomb chapel, you will also see something else that appears to be lifelike and that is stunning, and that is a sarcophagus of St. Therese. It is glass, but it is trimmed in gold, and the trimming was actually a piece of wood that was it was carved from one piece of wood, and then gold leaf was placed on that. It's 12 feet high and 14 feet wide, and within it there's a life-size figure of St. Therese right after death, and she is holding roses and a crucifix in her arms. And so all of this, at least the carving, was carved in Valencia, Spain, and yes, for those people who cannot travel to Lisieux, France, it is bringing basically all that here to San Antonio for people to make pilgrimage to. Above where that sarcophagus is, there are stained glass windows within that apse. These are in a different style than those in the nave. These are a Gothic style, and they, in 17 different scenes, tell the life of St. Therese, from being a young child to after and being made a saint and showering the basilica in roses. And so these have reference to her parents, and making them, of course, all the more important. They were named saints in 2015, so they refer to St. Louis and Zélie Martin. If you're still standing in that spot in the center of the transept, you will look up, and you will look up into the rotunda, but you can't see inside the rotunda. What you see is a round stained glass window that caps the opening of the rotunda, and you will see 24 roses appearing to be suspended in the air as if they're falling down from heaven, and again referring back to St. Therese wanting to shower us with blessings, and those blessings being in the form of roses, and one for every year of her life that she lived. So that is the interior of the dome. And then if you look to your right from that center of the transept, you will not only see the north entrance, but you will see two recessed altars flanking that doorway. There is one to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Of course, this church being in the Mexican area of San Antonio, where many immigrants originally settled, Our Lady of Guadalupe, very important. And then to the right is an altar to the infant Jesus of Prague, of particular significance to the Carmelites. The original statue thought to have been owned by St. Therese of Avila. And to the right of that is a statue of St. Jude, the patron of hopeless causes. And above this area, you'll notice a shallow balcony, and it's not really used because it was there for the cantors, and it cantilevers over that entrance. And this is only accessible by the monastery. This is where postulants from the monastery would gather to sing in Gregorian chant for the Latin Masses back before Vatican II. And above that is what is called the Elijah window, and this is an image of Elijah on a chariot of fire being pulled by fiery horses, and that is related to what we find in 2 Kings, chapter 2, 1 through 18, where Elijah is taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. So as we've described all this beauty, all these treasures, you can certainly see why this is also considered and called by those that live in that area as the jewel of the West Side. The West Side very proud of this shrine. And in fact, this led to some really special designations in 1998, where both the country and the Vatican officially recognized it.
Right. So it is both a national shrine and it is on the National Register of Historic Places, as well as being named a minor basilica. So let's talk about what those mean and how that comes about. Okay, so first of all, there are 2 types of basilicas. There's a minor basilica, like the Little Flower Basilica, and a major basilica. A major basilica are only found in Rome, right? So outside of Rome, there are minor basilicas. Basilica, that word, it actually comes from Roman architecture, and this means royal house or hall of the king. The basilicas originally were like open air malls. They were places of community gathering, and the early Christians actually adopted this architectural style and layout for the original Roman churches. So here we have in the United States 86 minor basilicas. In Texas, there are only 4. So for the rest of the program, instead of saying minor basilica, we're just going to say basilica. Okay. So the title of basilica is only granted to a church that is an active center of apostolic activity and based on its historic, architectural, and spiritual significance. So what happens is that the bishop of the diocese where the church or shrine is located has to recommend it to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops for consideration as a basilica. And if they deem it worthy, then they petition the Holy See in the Vatican. So by bestowing the title of basilica on a church, the Pope is acknowledging that the church has particular significance for the liturgical life of the church, as well as the pastoral or like the day-to-day life of the people. So what are the criteria to have your church be a basilica? Well, first of all, it needs to be sufficiently large. So the width is never greater than 1/2 of the length. That, again, goes back to the original idea of what a basilica looked like in Rome. The church has renown, and it has to have significant relics present. So the relics that we see in the Basilica of the Little Flower, first of all, in the tomb chapel, St. Therese is wearing a ring that the model of St. Therese within that sarcophagus is wearing a ring, and that has some of her hair.
Right, within it's a glass, like a charm on the ring that contains some of her hair.
Okay, and that is considered a first-class relic because that's part of her body. And then we also have another relic that was on the wooden reliquary over by the altar, I believe.
Yes, in the tomb chapel, exactly.
And that has a carved wreath of roses containing bone fragments from St. Therese and a swath of cloth from one of the habits or her religious scarp that she wore. So we also have a third first-class relic, and that is a piece of her bone marrow.
That one you can see more visibly, and because it's in a smaller gold reliquary that is about 4 or 5 inches tall, has a base, but it's glass. And usually, I'm trying to think if it's on Fridays or maybe on the Saturday Mass, but I do know that you can regularly, there's opportunities that the deacon or one of the friars will bring it out, and that you can venerate that particular relic.
Beautiful. So we have those significant relics of St. Therese. And then, as you mentioned, Robert, St. Therese's parents are also saints now as of 2015, Saints Louis and Zélie Martin. And so we have their first-class relics at the Basilica as well of St. Therese's parents. So we have the relics. In addition to that, we have sacred images that have to be present in a church in order for it to become a basilica. And there is also historical value or importance that needs to be present for a church to become a basilica. And as well, a fitting number of priests. So at the Little Flower, there is an average of about 6 friars.
Which is, more than your average parish may have 2 if you're
Absolutely.
lucky. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So having the monastery there is important for the basilica to continue being a basilica. The papal symbol, the crossed keys that you may see often on the Vatican flag, for example, may be exhibited on a banner. So we have as proof that the basilica is a minor basilica was granted by Pope John Paul II. We have a decree that was actually placed on lambskin in Latin, so really official, and it has the seal of John Paul II's ring, and that hangs in the transept near the tomb chapel. So in addition to that, because of it being a basilica, we see a couple other things as well. We see what's called a papal umbrellino, which looks like an umbrella.
Right, and it kind of, each section is colored, I think they alternate red and kind of a yellow, canary yellow, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And so that is half open, and it's in anticipation of a pope's visit. So that would be used in a procession over the Holy Father or over the Eucharist.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it was not a basilica yet when Pope John Paul II or St. Pope John Paul II came. Otherwise, that would have been used. The place, right.
Right, exactly. As we mentioned before, there is the cathedra or the chair that is reserved for the Pope, and it's always available to the bishop as well. And then we have what's called a tintinabulum.
Yes,
Thank you very much for that. That is the bell that is used to announce the arrival of the Pope. So those are the 3 elements that we see in a basilica that are unique. And again, this was the first designated basilica in 1998. It was the only basilica at that time outside of Lisieux that was dedicated to St. Therese.
Exactly. So, of course, we were able to explain beforehand, before we got to this point, why it, warranted being made one of the only 84 or 86 basilicas throughout the world that we have. So just a few things to mention as we have roughly about 7 or 8 minutes left in the program. It's worth talking about how when the Basilica celebrated 75 years in 2006, some things that came to be that were not there before that any visitor can currently appreciate. And one has to do with the fact that the basement or undercraft prior to 2006 was not really usable. It was a storage space. So this was all excavated. It was remodeled and refinished. And what you have now in this undercroft is a beautiful adoration chapel dedicated to the prophet Elijah. There are stained glass windows, also marking significant moments in the prophet's life, and they were also designed by the Emil Frey company that designed the stained glass windows in the nave.
So since you're bringing up St. Elijah, maybe I can just talk about briefly why he's significant again to the Carmelites. For the Carmelites, Elijah helps them to learn to listen for the voice of God. So we often hear this story about Saint Elijah on the mountain, and he is he's escaping for his safety. He was obviously a prophet, so the people did not like what the prophets had to say.
Right.
And so he was on a mountain, and he was listening for the voice of God to give him some guidance. And he hears God in this still small voice, not in the rumbling storm or in the fire, but in a still small voice. And so that is what the Carmelites look to as a model. Of course, the Carmelites being very contemplative religious order and a spiritual family.
As you describe that moment, so right outside of the Adoration Chapel in the foyer, there is a bronze statue depicting that particular moment. And Elijah has his cloak up, almost covering his face at that particular moment. Beautiful.
So in addition to that, we have another very significant piece of art that I really appreciate, and I feel like I haven't really visited the Basilica if I don't go and see the Celine painting.
That is powerful and directly, again, connected to her and her, because all but, I believe, one of her sisters became Carmelite nuns.
Yes. So this is a beautiful painting. It's very large. It's 10 feet by 7 feet. And it's depicting St. Therese scattering a shower of roses on the earth. And it has her quote in French below. Actually, that painting is called The Little Apotheosis of the Canonization. So this was created for her canonization in Rome. It was actually designed by Therese's blood sister, Celine, and that's why I called it the Celine painting. Right. She was called Sister Genevieve of the Holy Face. And so this painting was a gift from the Discalced Carmelite nuns in Lisieux, and it was restored for the 75th anniversary of her canonization and installed in a north hallway of the Undercroft. So it's beautiful.
It is, and for a while it had actually sat dormant for a few years. It had originally been in the baptistry, but when they put the elevator there, it kind of went into storage and had not really been appreciated until this point of the 75th anniversary.
So right, and we've talked about St. Therese a little bit, but we do invite you, if you're taking your own pilgrimage to the National Shrine of the Little Flower, to read about St. Therese, read a little bit about her life. Her autobiography, Story of a Soul, is one of the most well-published books in the world. And so we have that available to us. Take advantage of that. Read her diary. It will teach you about how to live a holy life. And what's important about St. Therese, again, is she is a doctor of the church. That means that she contributed, even as a 24-year-old girl, she contributed such significance of theology, of the way that we understand our path to holiness, that she is given this title, Doctor of the Church.
Exactly. And as you talk about her, it's worth noting that in just as an order, the whole idea of contemplation, life of prayer, fraternity, service, all of these things were embodied by St. Therese. So Carmelite spirituality, just something else to delve into, beautiful spirituality, something that very much affected St. Pope John Paul II. And in fact, it's another thing worth mentioning. In recent years, they added a life-size statue of St. Pope John Paul II that's in just as you come in from the narthex of the church. Yes, the Basilica of the Little Flower, located at Culebra and Zarzamora Road, there on the west side of San Antonio, definitely worth making a visit to.
Absolutely. So please crank up this Journey of Hope again on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. That's where you can find suggested reading material. So use these opportunities to help you make your pilgrimage to the National Shrine or another virtual pilgrimage, and you can share that with others, friends, and family. We want to invite you to go to pilgrimcenterofhope.org, and there you'll find all that information. And we are finally getting back to that point of the Journey of Hope when we are giving you a jewel.
Yes, so our jewel for the journey, something for you to think about until we meet again here on Journeys of Hope. It comes to us from St. Therese of Little Flower, and it reads, "Love can accomplish all things. Things that are most impossible become easy where love is at work." Beautiful thing to meditate on throughout the week, and maybe to be thinking about if you make a trip to the Basilica while you're there, taking in this beautiful, beautiful place. So now let's go ahead and we always also like to close our Journeys of Hope with a closing prayer to leave you with a blessing. So we'll all pray this together in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. This is a morning prayer, by the way, composed by St. Therese. Oh my God, I offer thee all my actions of this day for the intentions and for the glory of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I desire to sanctify every beat of my heart, my every thought, my simplest works, by uniting them to its infinite merits. And I wish to make reparation for my sins by casting them into the furnace of its merciful love. O my God, I ask of thee for myself and for those whom I hold dear the grace to fulfill perfectly thy holy will, to accept for love of thee the joys and sorrows of this passing life, so that we may one day be united together in heaven for all eternity. Amen.
Well, that concludes this journey. Thank you for joining us on Journeys of Hope. We invite you to come visit Pilgrim Center of Hope and learn more about our threefold ministry of pilgrimages, conferences, and outreach. Please visit pilgrimcenterofhope.org. That's pilgrimcenterofhope.org, or call us at 210-521-3377, 210-521-3377. Fellow pilgrims, on behalf of Pilgrim Center of Hope and Journeys of Hope, I want to thank you for journeying with us to the Basilica, the National Shrine of the Little Flower in San Antonio. Because we are a pilgrim people, strive to live your journey of hope with boldness, passion, and joy. Until next time, may God bless you. Safe travels.
Journeys of Hope, a production of Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ. Visit our website at pilgrimcenterofhope.org.